We'd like to interrupt this broadcast. Are you tired of losing day after day because your teammates are terrible, or frankly, aren't even all there in the head?
Take your Zim, unplug it from your Xbox, and throw it into a lake. Actually, don't do that, you might hurt a fish.
Are you done with the days of ruining the competitive integrity of gaming by carrying your friends up to a rank they're not even supposed to be, and then they start getting cocky like you wouldn't even be winning without me? You literally would not be winning. Do you wish that your game had just a bit more lag? A lot more lag. If you said yes to any of those questions, then Super Smash Bros. May be the game for you.
Ah yes, I just completely outskilled my opponent. Ask your doctor if Smash Bros is right for you. Side effects from Smash Bros may include rage, heartbreak, depression, distancing yourself from loved ones, distancing yourself from friends, distancing yourself from society, distancing yourself from showers. With the recent rumors about a possible new Smash game being announced for the Nintendo Switch 2 in the very near future, I think a lot of people have been kind of thinking about what it would be like for somebody to get into the Smash franchise in the modern day, and really what that looks like, the highs and the lows of it. So what I wanted to think about is kind of how that experience would go, the trials and tribulations, as I've had a couple friends recently start getting into it, and I've learned a lot about what it would be like. So in today's video, I'm going to be answering the question, should you get into Super Smash Bros? Before we get too deep, be sure to like and subscribe, and let's get straight into it. Smash is an iconic gaming franchise, and it's had numerous entries throughout the years on numerous consoles. However, it's somewhat outdated in the sense of there hasn't been a new Smash game since 2018, which is going to have been a little while ago, especially if we're talking the fact that we're probably not getting one till at least 2026. That's going to be 8 years gap, which is kind of crazy. I believe it is actually the longest gap between any two Smash games to have released. So for somebody getting into Smash in the modern day, they have so much to catch up with. And normally the big time to be getting into a new game would be right when the new one would release. Because when a new installment releases, even though there is still going to be some sort of skill gap between the players, because some pros will still carry over their fundamentals from previous games, it is still a bit more of a balanced playing field because there are going to be new mechanics and things like that that nobody really knows how to use very well. So it's almost leveled out for a little bit while everybody tries to learn what this game has to offer. However, we're not in that time right now. In a game like Smash Ultimate, the meta has developed so much since day one, with it being extremely aggressive in its early days, and now being a lot more laid back and kind of defensive. And even Melee, to a far higher degree, has evolved their meta. I couldn't even imagine somebody trying to get into Melee in 2025 if they never touched the game before. Every single day, I get at least one comment on one of my YouTube videos saying something along the lines of, if you're tired of Smash Ultimate, Melee is the game for you. And although I get their passion and that they want more people to play their game, I do think it's definitely going to be very hard for somebody who's never touched a Smash game in their life, or just comes from Smash Ultimate, but maybe not from a super competitive lens, to just get thrown into a 20-plus-year-old game like Smash Melee. Oftentimes people take for granted the amount of technical capabilities a game like Melee really holds, and how hard it would be for just a random kid growing up to try to get into a game like that. I appreciate their enthusiasm fully. However, I do think it's important to acknowledge that if somebody is really getting into the Smash side of gaming in 2025, and they're growing up around this time, it's far more likely that they are going to be into a more recent installment of Super Smash Bros. Than Melee for numerous reasons. Primarily being things like how technical and how high the skill ceiling is of a game like that, and then also the graphics just being somewhat outdated with, Melee players being a lot more used to it, but somebody coming from a lot of very new games kind of being thrown off by it. I think possibly if there was a Melee 2 or some sort of remake of Melee on the Nintendo Switch 2, this would be definitely something that a lot more people would have access to. However, the lack of accessibility being a big prominent issue in something like this, because Slippy is really not going to be something a lot of people are going to go for, because it's not something you can download on a console. And so it is going to be tougher for a lot of console gamers to get into that way. This all culminates in meaning that if somebody is starting their Smash journey today, it's likely going to be in Smash Ultimate. And that's not perfect either. Really think about it. There are so many issues with Smash Ultimate that us as the fans and the players are so used to, but somebody just getting into it today would be so thrown off by. Things like the immense amount of lag, rage quitting being really unpunished, and latency being very high even if there isn't any lag, just because of the programmed in delay on inputs that Nintendo literally puts into the online mode, just make playing online an absolute disaster. And if you don't always have somebody at your house to just play with you 24/7 and you're just trying to maybe grind Elite Smash, that's going to be killer for a lot of people. This isn't to mention that if you're trying to play a different solo mode, maybe the single player campaign, you're probably not going to enjoy it very much, because I know not many people did. I thought it was fine, really. I like the cutscenes a lot, but it is a lot of very repetitive gameplay, kind of boxed into what seems like a story mode, but it's really not. They kind of just put these shallow JPEG images over these random fights against 20 Yoshis in a basket. And it's like, this is really supposed to be thrilling gameplay, because that's not what I'm getting from this. The polish and immense movesets of all of these characters are really, really cool. And for many people getting into the game, it is awesome that they're going to have so many different characters from different gaming franchises and companies that they will recognize and be able to choose from. And I think Smash, as opposed to maybe something like Street Fighter or Tekken, is a bit more accessible in a lot of senses, because you don't necessarily have to know these very intricate combos to be able to get into the game. I fought a number of Pyra players on Elite Smash who probably don't even know Mithra is an option. And I do think this can get a lot of people into the game very, very quickly, and that polish is just something that's going to keep them around for a very long time. Speaking of Pyra and Mithra, however, this polish, if you want to call it that, is extra polished on the DLC characters. And this is something many people have complained about. It's just objectively true that if you look at the ranking of an average character, if you randomly generate 3 random fighters from the roster, and then you do 3 random fighters from the DLC pass, you will just have 3 better characters on the DLC side than on the main roster side. And you will have this every single time without fail, because they're just better. If you pay money for them, they're better. And that's just objectively true. They made the DLC fighters better. I don't know if they were intentionally trying to make them better so you had to buy them, but I do think that they were trying to add more to these characters so they would seem more fun. Like somebody like Joker having a whole Arsene mechanic as this little guy that pops up behind him and makes him do double damage for a period of time. That's a lot more fun. It's also a lot stronger though. Systems like this may put somebody off who's just now getting into Super Smash Bros. Because you gotta think, you're already buying the game for $60. And then on top of that, if you try to buy all the DLC, that's another $60. That's essentially doubling the price of the game. That's pretty insane when you think about it, because you're only getting like 11 more characters. I do think it's fun that there's a number of mini games and other modes outside of just the standard Smash, for example, Squad Strike or Home Run Bat, that people can have to play around with. However, one of these that I do think needs a lot of work is the training mode, with it really not having very many options for people to actually train and get better at the game, which is like, if you're not going to have that, what's the point of it really? But let's even stray away from the main Smash game for a moment. When you're really thinking about it, a lot of competitive sports have very large fan bases. However, not actually all of those people even play the game. A lot more are spectators than are actually competitors. And this could be the same with Smash, but it's not necessarily the greatest time to get into the competitive scene. Many of fan favorite top players have either retired, left, or are maybe waning their interest in the game, which means that right now we kind of have a meta with only a couple of the really old dominant players and a lot of new young talent rising up. And there's nothing wrong with this. This is actually a sign of a very healthy game. However, I do think that what may put people off to trying to get into the game in the modern day is the characters they're playing. When people imagine Smash competitive, they imagine something like Genesis 7 Grand Finals. Mars versus MK Leo. They're just hitting each other back and forth the whole time. Rapid pace. It's crazy to watch. Joker versus Zero Samus. These characters are both like quick and like ninjas. He's like flip kicking him off the side at like 30%. It's crazy, right? But realistically, when you're watching a modern day grand finals, you're really seeing Steve versus Luigi. And you're going to see a lot of blocks get placed down and a lot of mining happening. And this is not going to be something that necessarily hooks a lot of people into the game if they're starting to get into it in 2025. I know a ton of people got into Smash around like 2021, which was when tournaments like Summit 3 were taking place. And this was a really cool time for two reasons. The first of which being just the matches were awesome. It was a lot of cool characters being played, and a lot of older players were playing new characters. So it was just refreshing all around. It was still a very aggressive style with people like Cola playing, you know, the most rushed down Roy people had ever seen, and people like Light, you know, bringing the same Fox that everybody always loved. But also, on top of that, the storylines were just amazing. People always really wanted to see who was going to be better in the long run, MK Leo or Spargo, because Spargo was like the heir to the throne, but MK Leo just wouldn't give it up, and he would do anything in his power to fight him off. However, a lot of this is somewhat gone today, and I think it's for a couple reasons. I think for one, there may just be too many tournaments in too condensed of areas. For example, Japan has pretty much a super major every week or every other week at this point. And it is kind of crazy because there is a point where it's like, if the greatest players in the world are playing all the time, it makes it less special when they do it.
Is there nothing else after this? Guys, it's Japan. There's always something next. There's a freaking super major next week. Get the hell out of here, bro. I'll see you guys later. And for the Kulon stream. Oh my God, these niggas just don't stop.
Because of this, I think there should be a bigger break between these things, because think about it. If somebody is trying to get into Smash these days, like the Super Bowl in the NFL is once a year. The Olympics, the World Cup, these are once every 4 years. These give people so much time to anticipate, make their bets, all this stuff. It's insane the fact that we will have Kaguribi be the greatest, biggest tournament of all time, and the next week have Kowloon, which is like one of the biggest tournaments of all time. Like, it's maybe too much for a little bit. I think you need time to at least ride out the success of all this stuff that's been happening, because sometimes you'll have this huge storyline like, oh my God, Tweak gets 4th place, he's still on top. And then just a single week later at Kulon, he's getting, you know, 65th place, and he's like, I retired. And it's like, what is happening? So much is happening in such a short period of time. Overall with Smash, there's still a ton for people to get into, but these are just little roadblocks that I think could make it more difficult for people along their journey getting into the franchise. If I were to make a final call on whether or not you should try getting into Smash in 2025, or you should play the game in 2025, I would say you should at least give it a try. You may enjoy it. I do think there's a lot of really beautiful and great things about the game still, and I still have a lot of love for it. Even if it's not the greatest it's ever been, there's still a lot of great to be harvested from it, even in the modern day. I've had so much fun playing the game throughout all these years and seeing things change and evolve, and I think that can be a very fruitful experience, as well as the fact that there's a lot of community to be built there. There's nothing like rooting for your favorite player just to watch them get beat by Steve once again. That just makes your day, you know? I just have the biggest smile on my face after that. Can't you see how happy I am right now? I also do think it is a pretty good time to be getting into the franchise if we're just speaking about 2025, because you're kind of getting a head start going into the next game. So I do think it could be beneficial in that regard as well. But yeah, what do you guys think? If you guys have played for a long time, are you still into Smash in 2025? And do you guys know people that are just now getting into the game? I've got a friend who's getting into it right now, and he's facing his fair share of trials and tribulations, but I think overall he's enjoying it. Please be sure to like and subscribe if you guys have enjoyed the video, and the support has been just insane recently. We are within 35 subscribers of 1,000, which is just a really big number. So that would be really cool if we could hit that number. Thank you guys so much for watching, and see ya.
I'm on the scooter. I'm on the scooter.